Hello and good morning, folks. So the first part of this video that I'm going to do is just really the setup for the project for Unit 5. As you can see, I already have some things set up here, so I'm just going to go through them. I have the player set up right here, so this is the player sprite that we control. You have a really basic, or I've set up this really basic movement blocks. This is part of our project, but since it's such a, common thing, I'm not really going to go through it again. It's if right arrow is pressed, we change X by 10, and otherwise we change it in the negative direction. What I also do for this project is important is I use my starting screen. So you can see here, the game starts on this black background. So when the flag is clicked, there's a couple of different sprites and stuff within the game that receive that message. Right here, we switch the costume game start for my stage. You can see that's just a black background, so I can put this button here on it. I also have the game 1 screen and a game over screen for what you would expect to be using them for. I have a game start button here. This is a sprite with just an image that I've imported. I've made the background transparent. You can see that costume right here. And then in my scripts, when my flag is clicked, I make it, I put it on the screen. And once it's clicked, I actually start the game, right? And I broadcast that message from right here, and then I hide that sprite. So going back to my player sprite, what I do when I receive game start, well, first when I get the flag clicked, I hide and I let this button show instead. And then once I receive the game start message though, I show so players can see it. So we'll go ahead and demonstrate that. It's pretty simple. I set a variable called players lives to 3. So I just make it, hey, 3 lives, pretty standard. And we'll set up how to lose those later. And then I also broadcast player move, which goes right here to a separate statement that controls that forever loop I showed you earlier. I will show you my projectile control block here in a later video so we can set that up, but this is kind of what I have so far. Another thing is I have a common projectile right here. This has no scripts as of yet. We'll build that, but this is just the sprite we're going to use for it. I've named it projectiles. You can see right here. I also have a sprite that I call Bad Dude, who is the evil character. If you've seen the demo, this is kind of the alien of the Space Invaders type genre. And then finally, I have the Bad Projectile, which is just a simple glass of water. So I have all this set up. And so far, this is the most code that I have. As you can see, when we start, we get this sprite right here to show up. And then that is where we start with our motion for when I can go left to right. So what I want to focus on next is sending our projectile. So I'm going to go ahead and show our projectile real quick. I didn't import it, but I chose one of the costumes that Snap has. I use this little pencil right here. And we're basically going to make it so that when we start, that pencil goes from here and goes straight on up until it disappears and then deletes itself. And we're going to do that using cloning, which is of course the point of the unit. But right now I am going to, I guess I'll leave it right there for now. The first thing I'm going to do is have it start. And so when the flag is clicked, I want this to hide. So that's pretty simple. I just find the hide action right there, the hide block. And so now when the flag is clicked, that'll completely go away as so. I also want to set up what happens when it receives the send projectile message. So real quick, I'm going to go back to my player and I'm going to show you the control for this. So we had this forever loop for the player originally, or I should say right now, it really just controls us going left to right, as you can see there on the screen, but I actually need this to send projectiles up and down. So this is pretty simple. I just connected it to the space key and I have it broadcast a message. So this broadcast send projectile message right here is going to be caught by my dog, or not by my dog, but by the pencil. And it's going to choose what it does. So I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to go to my projectile. And now I want to set up control. I want to say what happens when we receive that message. So that's completely incorrect. I want to say when I receive send projectile, what do I do? Well, in this case, I'm going to have it create a clone. So I'm going to find my create a clone block, and I'm going to snap that in right there. And I'm going to say create a clone of myself. Then, of course, what happens when a clone is created? We have a block that is when I start as clone. and that's going to control our behavior whenever that block is triggered. So that block will get as many input as possible. It will create these clones, and they're going to do something. Here, I am going to start by showing myself. I am going to set up some stuff. So if you're, following with me 100%, the pencil actually starts out pretty large. I've worked on this already, so I know what size I want it to set to. And I also want to set it to a particular direction. Again, this is all very specific. I've already known this going in. I want to find point and direction right here. And when I was messing with it earlier, I found that 232 is what kind of makes it as upright as possible. And then, of course, I want to go to a position. Since we are going to start at the origin of the player, I'm going to go to sensing, and I want to go to... actually, no, this is incorrect. I want to go to the X and Y of the player sprite. So here I'm going to duplicate, snap that in right there, snap this in right here. And my Y position, of course, is going to be Y of player. And then furthermore, I'm going to go to control, and I'm going to repeat. I'm going to repeat until is the block I'm going to use. I'm going to use repeat until to move upward. And I'm going to move upward until I go past a certain point. So I'm going to change X, no, not change X, change Y by 10. And I want to do that until my Y position is too high. So I'm going to do Y position right here, find motion. Say I'm going to go until my Y position is greater than, I believe 200 is a solid spot. So we're going to do that. And then I want to delete this clone. So I'm going to snap that right there, and I'm going to try this out. So I should be able to shoot. Well, hopefully we have no issues. So you can see it goes, it deletes itself pretty proper, but I'm going to show you right now what happens when we let loose a little bit too much. So here, as you can see, if I start to send out more of these sprites, we get lagged down, right? And we don't want that in our game. We're going to have a lot more clones coming in. So I need a way to be able to track the number of clones, and I'm going to restrict the number to, let's say, maybe less than, we can do 3, but no more than 3, right? So how do we do that? Well, we start counting using a variable the number of clones we have. So I'm going to say projectile clone. I'll say projectile clone count. I think that is a proper and very descriptive variable, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. I am going to say when I start as a clone, actually, I'm going to say set the projectile clone count to projectile clone count plus 1 when we start. Plus 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that, drag it down here, and right before I delete the clone, I'm going to stay with the add because I'm lazy. I'm going to add -1 to it. So that way we'll be able to keep track of how many clones we're doing, how many clones we're using. So here, if you can see, as I start to hit this a lot, that projectile clone count right here goes up. So what I want to do is be able to check that before I create it. So the place that I found it is best for this is when I receive send projectile, I want to see if the projectile clone count is greater than actually, I want to see if it's less than. Technically, I could have used that, but I like staying somewhat proper when I can. So I'm going to say if the projectile clone count is less than 4 is where we create a clone of myself. If not, it's just going to do nothing, basically. So here we have this. And then I think that should be about everything I want. Actually, one thing I do want to do before I move on is set the clone count to 0 when we first start. That way we don't start with whatever, we had beforehand. So I'm going to go ahead and click start. And you can see there it's restricting the number. Even though the projectile clone count will look like it's going really high, I can fire no more than 3. It's not going to slow my game down, right? So I can fire 1 normally. I can fire 2 if I want. But no matter how hard, and you can see right there the receive send projectile count right here is losing its mind. It's getting counts of 8, 7, and so on, but it can't do any more than that. So that is how we set up our projectiles for the player. And the next videos will show how we can set up the enemy motion as well as the projectiles for the enemy, which will follow a very similar design pattern.